Sony has announced the PlayStation 5 Pro. It is going to be $700. It's digital only, and you have to pay for the vertical stand. And I have a lot to say about it. Jumping right into it, they had three main pillars they wanted to talk about. They increased the power of the GPU, the graphics processor. They increased the ray tracing performance, and they announced PSSR, which is their kind of frame generation tech that is similar to NVIDIA's DLSS and AMD's FSR. Getting into each one of these, the GPU has been increased in power by roughly 45% or so. It was around there. And to do that, they said that they added more memory and added faster memory. This is pretty standard fare. If you have a PC, you want to make it run faster, play games better, you get a better GPU. This is a relatively small upgrade when it comes to, like, if you bought a new GPU for your PC, I think you'd be looking for a significantly bigger jump in power than what they're doing here, but it's not a bad thing. This is the least controversial thing I think they could do for a pro version, is just to put more power in it. Same as a car. If you want to go faster, put a bigger engine in it, From that, they talked about ray tracing. Ray tracing is an interesting one right now. A lot of modern games are introducing ray tracing, not even as optional at this point. It's baked into a lot of these games where it often does things with lighting and shadows and reflections. And some games even are using ray tracing for sound. There's hardware and software ray tracing. The software is nice because you don't have to have graphics processing that has special hardware just for it. It also bogs down your hardware. It's very demanding resource-wise. So hardware ray tracing is cool because on most modern GPUs, even in the current modern consoles, there's little chips in there that all they do is ray tracing. And that's really nice. And so what it seems like they've done here with the PS5 Pro is added more of that hardware. And then the PSSR is interesting. So it... if you don't know what this kind of technology is, the most basic explanation, whether it's DLSS or FSR or now PSSR, I believe XeSS is Intel's version of it, is if you try to use the current hardware, say the current consoles, to play a game at 4K 60 FPS, it's not going to. It's either going to struggle. It's going to, the frames are going to drop. The resolution's not going to work. That's very demanding resource wise. So what this technology does is it plays games. It makes your hardware show these games at, say, 1080p 30 FPS. And it's a two-part system where it boosts the resolution from like 1080p to 4K. And then it takes those 30 frames per second and inserts an extra frame in between each frame, making it 60 frames per second. And those frames are AI generated, and it's using the previous gameplay footage, the previous pictures that were generated by your console, to guess what the next one looks like. So every other frame that you're seeing is a guess. And it's gotten pretty good. It's not perfect. It still has lots of issues with ghosting and things like that. If you've played a modern like Unreal Engine 5 game on the consoles and you played performance mode and it was real washed out and like fuzzy, that was probably FSR. That was probably one of these technologies. So for PlayStation to introduce their own version of this is a pretty big deal. Now, to talk about my kind of reaction to all of these things, like I said before, the GPU boost, I think that's fairly simple. That's a good thing. Great. That makes sense. Them not doing a CPU boost is interesting. I assume that would require probably more changes to their hardware than they want to do. I'm sure at this point their economy of scale is probably in their favor quite a bit now. They're probably able to make this hardware relatively cheap, at least compared to before. And so their profit margins are probably okay. Profit margins on hardware is bad in general. But if you can make any profit margin, which I believe they do on the PlayStations, that's a good thing. And I suspect that's why they didn't want to change much there. GPU boost, great. The ray tracing one is interesting. I suspect that it may help in some situations. The biggest reason I think it may not be that big of a deal, though, is that because this is tied to the PS5 still, games for the next 3, 4, 5 years are still going to be made with the PS5 as the target. And so they can add in extra features and modes and stuff just for the PS5 Pro, sure. But at some point, there's only going to be so much more they can do with this, especially because the PS5 Pro is simply going to not sell nearly as much as the PS5. So they still have to cater to the majority of the audience, which will make the utilization of the PS5 Pro probably fairly minimal. Not zero, but not what people who spend $700 on it probably want. But the ray tracing boost, again, it's another hardware boost, great. The PSSR, I'm still a little more skeptical of. DLSS from NVIDIA is the best of this kind of tech. FSR by AMD is okay. It's really struggled to catch up to DLSS and still isn't there. You also see pretty bad implementations of it on the current consoles because they both do have access to it. And they use it, and you've seen many games have access to it and use it. And it often doesn't look great. At least in my opinion, it hasn't been used very well so far. PSSR is brand new. They're just going to be introducing it. It's going to be on a fairly small number of consoles in the big picture. There's a really good chance that PSSR is not going to be as good as FSR. And it's likely only going to get implemented on first-party Sony games. I would be really surprised if very many third-party games implement this tech. And it's probably going to take until the PS6 for it to get a lot better and pass up XeSS, FSR, and maybe DLSS. I'd be amazed if they were ever able to get better than DLSS, but who knows? And so when you look at the whole package, to me, it's a strange sell because I don't know who they're selling this to. When they showed all this footage, they showed comparisons of PlayStation 5 quality mode, which is 4K 30 FPS, versus the PS5 Pro, which in theory is 4K 60 FPS. And obviously that comparison looks good. One example I can remember is The Last of Us. They showed 30 FPS is always going to look worse than 60, no matter how you're seeing it on whatever video format, whatever. The thing they didn't do, at least I didn't notice them doing, is comparing PlayStation 5 performance mode to PlayStation 5 Pro, because then they're both going to be 60 FPS. And the differences are going to be way harder to spot to the average person. The average person doesn't really notice resolution. They probably will notice frames though. And what was interesting is that they spent a lot of time zooming way in and showing us stills from this gameplay. And so I believe it was The Last of Us where they zoomed in on the PS5 Pro, and way off in the distance there was this sign that was pretty fuzzy, not the highest resolution, but generally readable. And then the same scene in the PS5 quality mode, I believe, where it was fairly blurry way off, which isn't a great comparison because no one really cares about that. In the moment, you're not paying attention to those things. And the average eye can't discern those differences. And so what I think is interesting about this is they're obviously targeting enthusiasts. But the problem is PS5 enthusiasts already have a PS5. They may have recently upgraded to a PS5 Slim. And now they're being asked to now upgrade maybe again, and for $700 without a disk drive. And you have to pay for a vertical stand. And yeah, sure, you get 2 terabytes, but you probably already upgraded the memory in your base PS5. And you can move it over, sure. But, you know, that probably doesn't feel great. And so if it's not attracting people who already have a PS5, even though it will some, then the other target base are people who don't have PS5s yet. Either someone who still has a PS4 and has waited to upgrade, maybe a PS4 Pro, someone like me who doesn't have a PlayStation at all. But I really don't think, and this includes me, if someone was already leery about spending $500 on hardware, I definitely am not interested in $700 when at least I'm not really seeing a clear like, oh wow, I have to have that. Because nothing about it really looked like that impressive. Now, as time goes on, we're going to get reports from like Digital Foundry and the other people who test this stuff. And maybe they will say, actually, PlayStation didn't sell this very well. This is really cool. Or they may say, yeah, it's an upgrade, but to most people, it may not seem worth $700. I'm just curious to who the target audience for this is. Now, with the PlayStation 4, they sold, I believe, around 15 million PS4 Pros, and then they sold, over 100 million base PS4s. Sony probably never expects this PS5 Pro to be their top selling console. It is very likely they will continue to sell more of the base consoles. And this, again, will go to the enthusiast. But I wouldn't be surprised if the numbers on this end up being even lower than the PS4 Pro, because the PS4 Pro and the One X, the One X seemed like legitimate upgrades, like a big deal. Project Scorpio, if you remember. And this kind of, at least to me, doesn't have that same juice. I could be wrong. Maybe this is my fanboyism coming out. I'm really interested in how the long-term reception of this is going to be. This gives me big like Apple vibes, where they're kind of like, yeah, we're improving it a little bit and we're charging a lot for it, but it says PlayStation on it. And we think that means you'll buy it. And some people will. That is absolutely the truth for some. I suspect it won't be for most. I'm going to make a whole nother video about what I think this means for Xbox, what it means for PlayStation in the long run. I would talk about Nintendo, but they're off doing their own thing, so they don't care. But I think this is going to have big impacts on the future of all of the platforms, especially PlayStation and Xbox. And I have some really fun theories to throw out there about what I think may happen in the short and long term for especially Xbox and PlayStation, and how things could get really wild in the next few years. But that's for another video. If you like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you want more PlayStation, console, Xbox, gaming news in general, reviews, speculation, all of that stuff. If you would like to comment and let me know what you think about the PlayStation 5 Pro, tell me down below. If you really want to support this channel, get videos like this a bit early, have a cool little icon beside your name when you comment, and help me support all the stuff that I do, including the podcast and these videos, consider becoming a YouTube member. If you want to check out my other content and all of the other ways you can support, check out the link in the description of the video. That is all I have for this one. So until next time.